Hi, Todd. Welcome to the Art of Living Well podcast. We are both so excited to have you on to talk about one of our favorite topics, which is sleep. As we know, it's so foundational to everyone's life. And Marnie and I have been mouth taping and using dream recovery for quite some time. And I have to say, I started out mouth taping like maybe 3 years ago and went through multiple different brands that wouldn't stay on or were like honestly suffocating. And
Yeah.
yours is the first one that works. My husband's now using it. My
I love to
college
hear
age
it.
son, I just sent him back from fall break with mouth tape and he started giving it to his friends.
I
So,
love it.
yeah,
I
we're,
love
we're,
it.
we're big
College,
fans.
yeah, yeah, that's good to hear because I had a similar experience. That's kind of how it came about. It's just very self-serving and an evolution of trying different stuff.
Yeah, well, great. Well, we can't wait to share more about that today. So, before we dive into sleep and mouth taping and all the good things, one question we have for you. If you could do something today, no, financial constraints, no time, what would it be?
I can do anything.
Anything.
What would it be? I would I would go to Cedar Point with my friend Pete. It's a
Oh
big
my
roller
gosh.
coaster
I've been
place.
there. Yes, I've
Yeah,
been there
yeah,
a
yeah.
ton.
We
To a roller coaster?
so it's weird. So I used to be obsessed with roller coasters as a kid, and he was also obsessed. And I'm from Michigan, he's from Ohio, so we love Cedar Point. We actually for Christmas last year, I got him season tickets. We both had season tickets, but we didn't go at all this year because life's busy. And so,
To the roller coaster, just so I'm
yes,
understanding.
yes,
It's an
yes.
amusement
Okay.
park,
It's more
but
of a
Marty, they
childhood
had,
thing, but
yes,
we've been trying to get there, and
Nice.
it just hasn't happened. So I've been that's like that's high priority, something that's just kind of like fell by the wayside.
okay, that's so fun. It's like playful and fun, and it doesn't
Yeah, it's like
require you
being a
to,
kid again.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
So is
I've
it
been
on
there
your
several
calendar?
times.
Like, when are you
No,
going?
that's the problem. Well, so it's cold and it's in Ohio, so it's
Yeah.
cold. So it doesn't open. It's closed now. It doesn't open till I want to say May, maybe
May.
April. So we need to put a hard date on there. So
Yeah.
I'll text him today. This will motivate me to text him.
It's
Oh,
awesome.
that's so fun.
Well, Todd, we would love to hear if you could provide us with some of your insights about your pivotal moments and kind of how you got into becoming a sleep expert and
Yeah.
creating dream recovery. And we know you have a podcast. And how did you get
Yeah.
into all of this?
Yeah. I mean, so it was an evolution and it really stemmed from trying to perform at the highest level. Well, if like really, it stemmed from a little bit of insecurity as a kid. If that's really where it started. I was overweight, not in shape, and I kind of got into fitness and working out and started feeling better and kind of parlayed that into athletic abilities. And so ended up, walking out playing football, played in the NFL for a little bit, but I was always obsessed with human performance. Like even in college, I was always wanted to learn about our strength conditioning program and the whys and reading back then it was like muscle and fitness and like those were the go-tos, men's health, all those things. But I always loved that side of things of just the body is such an interesting thing that we don't know everything about. And it's just wild, all the different things and aspects of performance. And so I was obsessed with that, from a self-serving athletic performance perspective, but I knew I wanted to go into something along those lines right after I got done, entering the real world. And so initially, I became a strength conditioning coach. I went back and worked at the place I trained for Pro Day, which is like, all the testing you do for NFL scouts, and worked with like really high level athletes. And then I started working with Equinox on the management, like the corporate side of things more, and training personal trainers and educating. And man, it's probably 8 years ago, maybe I got to spend time with Dr. Jennifer Martin. And this was before sleep was not, a mainstream thing. It was very kind of undervalued, I would say. And almost, it was almost deemed like a lazy thing, if you prioritize sleep.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then, digging through the science, which has evolved a lot, but digging through it, I just kind of had this eye-opening moment where I was like, this is insanely impactful and nobody is addressing this. So from that point, it really sparked an interest in me, and I started taking every class I could get my hands on, online stuff, reading studies. Again, even to this day, it's interesting because a lot of it's clinical, but there's not a lot on like, how do I take someone that's relatively healthy, that doesn't have a big clinical issue and make them feel as good as they can.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of self-exploration there. but kind of dedicated my life to that in a sense, through the lens of strength conditioning, because I quickly realized the more and more data that came out, like if you want to make someone perform better, increase their quality of life, make them feel better on an emotional side, make them feel better, sleep is the first thing we should look at and the fastest way to impact somebody. So, I come from my parents are teachers, and I think I've always come from like I really enjoy serving people and helping people, and nothing makes me smile more than making someone feel better. And people feel better. It's amazing how everyone in their life is impacted, their relationships, their job, their kids, everything is elevated by feeling better. And I firmly believe sleep is the fastest route to making that happen.
I couldn't agree
We
more.
could not agree more. We
Yeah.
talk about sleep a lot on this podcast. We both
Yeah.
coach clients, and that is one of the top topics that we discuss
Yeah.
is sleep.
Which is
Because it's
cool because
foundational.
yeah, but 5 years ago, that would have been like you know, if you send a new client or something a survey, if, let's say they were doing personal training or something, that would have been like one of 50 questions that you ask, and kind of like, okay, well, it's fine. I sleep pretty good, whatever. It was never really a deep dive, and it's really, really cool the direction everything is going and the attention it's finally getting.
Right. Well, because it used to be that lack of sleep was a badge of honor.
Yeah. And that's
when it
still
came
out
to
there.
work.
There's still
I
a
was
lot
going to say, it's not a
Still-
used to be. I think it still is for many, many people.
We're in a bubble, I would say, but the majority of people don't.
We're outliers here.
I think they know, people start to know, but I think there's still this hustle culture of like, I'm going to sleep when I'm dead, and the more is better. The more I work is the harder I work, and that's not necessarily true.
Right.
The I'm going to sleep when I'm dead comment just gets me every time.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm always like, well, you're going to be dead a lot faster.
Yeah,
so you'll have plenty
really?
of time because you're going to get that timeline is going to be moved up if you think that way.
Exactly. So let's dive in and just talk like foundationally about sleep.
Yeah.
Can you maybe touch on like the different cycles? Like we've all heard about REM sleep and deep sleep, but now that a lot of us have the whoops and the Oura rings and things, we're diving into that a little bit more. But like, how does the amount of time you spend in these cycles really impact how well rested you feel? Because it's honestly more the quality of your sleep even than the quantity.
Yeah, I struggle with like talking about this sometimes because as much information that's out there, and I think it's really valuable for people to understand the gravity of sleep and know all this stuff from a background perspective. But then also there's this like hyper optimization mindset out there a little bit. So it's like it's great to know the background, but also it's never going to be perfect, and understanding like you need to let your body do its thing. So it's almost like knowing and caring the least amount when you're able to sleep the best. Like, and I've seen people also go down to as far this path.
Yeah.
But so I try to like really simplify like the sleep cycles. And I think Oura and Whoop, they're great companies. I've worn a Whoop for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. But if you're waking up every day looking at your sleep cycles and diving through the percentages, I think that's probably a red flag, and it's not great for your long-term sleep. Eventually, that's probably going to catch up with you. But in general, I like to break sleep up into two types of sleep, right? Like your non-REM sleep and your REM sleep, right? And then specifically within the non-REM is like your slow wave deep sleep. And so those are like the most impactful things in sleep, right? And really the non-REM sleep, the first couple stages are more just it's more of like your elevator down to the slow wave deep sleep. And then our REM sleep is like a completely different thing. And so I like to just, when I talk, especially to athletes, like your non-REM sleep, think about that's like your physical regeneration, like your muscles, your tissue, and that's how we're kind of rebuilding our body. And then our REM sleep is like our mental reset. That's the time when we reset our emotion, our mood stability, and kind of allow our mind to reset from a psychological perspective. So that's kind of how I break it up. The other thing that's interesting that happens in the slow wave sleep is, that's really our time for our brain to flush. It's called slow wave because it's a one time where like our brain waves are functioning at these like these synchronized large pulses, which never really happen during wakefulness. And then we also, we have this fluid that's pumping that's literally like clearing out all our byproducts, cellular byproducts throughout the day, which those can lead and build up and create plaques that cause Alzheimer's and different neurodegenerative stuff. So it's like you have the physical side, also clearing out of your brain the waste and in the non-REM, and then the REM is like the mental reset. So
Mm.
within that, so when they look like that, I think what people do is they're like, okay, how much deep sleep did I get? How much REM sleep did I get? And I always compare it to like a band where it's not really about how like one is not better than the other. Like it's not like how much deep sleep can I get? How much REM sleep can I get? A lot of psychiatric disorders have massive amounts of REM sleep as a symptom. So it's not like one is better than the other. It's about the proportions and how synchronized they are. So I compare it to a band because it's like in a band, like the guitar is not more powerful or better than the drums. And you can't make up for lack of guitar with more drums. It's about how they interact with each other and play together. So I think having these sleep cycles are just flowing in a nice way is what we're looking for. And for the most part, I think when people get, they have consistent bedtimes and wake times and they're sleeping the right amount of sleep, most people, those things kind of fall into place. And it's not something I think people need to really hone in on because not only can you overthink it, also just the accuracy of, a finger or wrist-based sleep cycle device. They're not the most accurate things. It's not something to get caught up on. So that's usually I just think, okay, consistency and the quantity, and you're probably in a good place if you feel good, you feel rested, you have energy. And that's usually how I relay the information. And I think it's also important to point out like the only way to get all these cycles is to have those two things because our REM sleep tends to happen more the second half of the night, closer to the morning. More of the slow wave sleep happens the first half of the night. So what's interesting is like if you stay up late, you don't start at the beginning of your night's sleep. It doesn't shift the whole thing. Your body is more timed up with that circadian rhythm. So we kind of jump into that, more of the REM cycles or more that
Hmm.
that sleep you have the second half of the night, and you
Hmm.
skip that non-REM sleep, and vice versa. If you wake up super early, you're more chopping out the REM cycles and only getting that non-REM sleep. So there's the only way to get these nice proportions and flows of sleep are to have consistency in bed and wake time and quantity of sleep. And so I think those are really good things to focus on and not get too caught up in the weeds with the other stuff.
That's so interesting. I've never heard it explained that way. I feel like we've had so many different sleep people on over the
Yeah.
years, and that's a really good way to think about it. And I know I talk about my husband all the time and how he does not sleep enough and over caffeinated and all the things that you don't
Oh
want to
yeah.
do. But he goes to
Well, you
bed
can't tell him
really,
that. Somebody else has to tell
yeah,
him. Yeah,
somebody else
that's not
has
how it
to.
works.
He'll listen to this
Yeah,
podcast. He'll
yeah,
listen to you
Yes,
chat.
he will listen to the podcast. So anyway, but like, I go to bed at a pretty decent time every night because I'm into my circadian rhythm and all the things. And, he'll go to bed hours after me. So he's basically not getting that physical rejuvenation,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Depending on
is
what
the
time he
way
wakes
I'm
up.
thinking,
Yeah, for
right?
sure. Yeah.
Like,
So if you have your normal times and you cut one end or the other off, you're just basically cutting off the biggest chunk of either, yeah, that physical side of sleep or the psychological side. And that first half of the night is really impactful when you think about longevity and long-term cognitive
yeah.
function,
Mhm.
because that is the time where that fluid, that cerebral spinal fluid is literally pumping. They did MRI, and the first live MRI was in 2019, I believe. And they actually saw like this fluid like pumped through the brain and literally flushed out all these little, toxins. And so um, I don't want to say one's more important than the other, but as far as longevity goes, as far as the brain functioning optimally, like, getting those earlier hours of sleep are really, really impactful.
So I have a question about that. I'm just thinking about someone, let's say there's a person, this is hypothetical, that lives like a very alternative schedule and they go to bed at 3 a.m. and they
Yep.
wake up at noon consistently.
Yep.
But they're, the sun sets at, 6 o'clock and rises in the normal times,
Hmm.
whatever. Are they're still getting enough quantity. Is their quality
Yeah.
affected?
Yeah. So the quality is only affected by, so you can, from everything I've seen, you can train yourself to shift it if it's consistent,
Okay.
like, so they do, gradually adjust. The problem is when you're bouncing back and forth. That's when
Okay.
they start getting cut off. But what's interesting is there's some new stuff coming out about the amount of sleep prior to midnight being more impactful for things like hunger levels and um, maintaining healthy weight and different factors in general, just across the spectrum of just that sleep being more impactful from a health perspective prior to
Mm,
midnight, which is interesting because like, if someone's adjusted, you wouldn't think that it would really make a difference timing wise. And I think there's more to learn here because my guess are, when I look at those studies, it's like the lifestyle of someone that's going to bed at 9 and waking up at 6 is probably a lot different than a 1 to 9 a.m. person. And I bet that
Hmm.
probably plays a big role, but it
right.
does seem sleep before midnight is even worth a little bit more on the scale of importance or health.
Okay. Well, and I love too how you're saying like you could be stressing yourself out mentally, which isn't good by
For
being so
sure.
obsessed with all the devices.
I've seen
And
that more and
so,
more the last like 2 years than I've ever seen
yeah,
before.
I mean, I
yeah,
was probably like that when I first got my Aura ring. When I first got it, every night I was like, "Oh my gosh, what happened last night?" and
Yeah.
trying to figure it out. And now I'm kind of like, "Okay,
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to like the problem becomes is like when you let a number dictate how
yeah,
you feel. When you
feel,
wake up and you see a
hmm
number and you convince
right.
yourself either positive or negative that that's how you feel, especially, when we speak with athletes and not that people, the reason I think people should care about when we talk about athletes is it's just a hyper focused goal. So usually if things work for an athlete that's really optimized as far as their performance goes, if it works for them, it tends to be even more impactful for your general population. So I don't know,
Right.
it's not like if it's an athlete, we're talking about an athlete, it doesn't pertain to everybody. It's just a really nice group of people to study things on because it's hyper focused. But with an athlete, it's like part of being an athlete is it doesn't matter what you wake up and that Aura rank says. It's a game day. Like you have to get it done. People need to take that approach in their day-to-day life too. There are times where you're going to sleep bad. You're not going to feel the best. Your things happen. You might have kids, whatever it may be, but you still have to get through the day, and you're going to be fine. Like
Yeah.
you pulled all nighters. You had horrible nights of
Right.
sleep. You're going to have another chance. So don't let those things compound on each other where you're like, I'm in the red and I feel really bad. And now you just talk yourself into having a horrible day when it could be pretty minor, the impact that it actually has.
Yes. No, agree. So let's just talk like some practical things with sleep because we know that like having alcohol, close to
Yeah.
bedtime is going to wreak havoc and eating a big meal.
Yep.
I think that really impacts your heart rate variability,
Yeah.
which we've talked about on this show quite a bit. But like, what about even caffeine? Because there are so many adults and myself, I mean, going back many years, I'd be like, I could have an espresso after dinner at 11 o'clock at night and go straight to bed.
Yeah.
But there are still adults that think that doesn't, they can have coffee very late at night. But what's really going on?
Yeah, I mean, and they probably can, but that doesn't mean it's not having an impact. It's similar to
Yeah.
alcohol. It's like you can drink and probably fall asleep faster and
Right.
feel like you're sleeping well. That doesn't mean that it didn't impact your sleep. And I think caffeine's interesting because some really great studies on caffeine. It seems very good that it net positive. It would almost be, there's some people that are like, oh, I want to completely give up caffeine. And I'll often be like, well, why is that the case? Because it seems there's very little downside in caffeine in controlled doses. Now, the amounts you have and when you have it becomes the issue. And I think that caffeine's I think it's because it's so ingrained in our culture. People don't realize like that obviously it's a drug and it lasts a long time in your body. And I also don't
Yeah.
think people fully understand what it does. So caffeine more makes you not feel tired as opposed to gives you energy, right? It blocks
Mm,
some of the receptors that make you feel tired. And it doesn't actually boost like your dopamine and some of the things that give you energy as much as people probably think. Um, which becomes an issue, right, in the second half of the day. And the other thing is in the morning when you're blocking, some of those receptors, it's like those chemicals build up throughout the day that make you feel tired. So in the morning, it's really not that impactful anyways because they haven't even built up yet. So
mm,
I think people understanding like what caffeine does and how long it lasts, that the half-life is 5 to 6 hours. Um, so that means basically, 6 hours for half of it to be metabolized you're talking about a really long length of time where it's impacting your body. And so, I always give the comparison, if somebody had like 3 cups of coffee and maybe they had one at 8 o'clock, at noon, and like two, which is pretty standard. So 300 milligrams of caffeine, small cups of coffee. Like that's probably a pretty average American, I would say. Because of the length of time it takes to metabolize, you're talking, you'll probably have, at 11 p.m., you'll have like 80 to 90 milligrams in your system still, which is comparable to drinking a Red Bull at
Yeah.
at bedtime. So but in turn, if you had the 300 milligrams at 8 a.m., like a large coffee instead, you're having the same amount, but it'd be at a much better place by the time bedtime rolled around. So I think it's like just being intentional with some of that stuff. And even like with the alcohol, like, we have such a culture of drinking wine after dinner or having like a nightcap where it's like, well, if you drank that glass of wine when you were making dinner, right, instead of
Or at
after,
lunchtime,
that's
like
in
like the
lunchtime, maybe
Europeans.
during the
Like,
podcast at 11:30
yeah,
Right.
a.m.
I mean,
oh, cheers. I'm just
But
kidding.
yeah, I mean, it makes way more sense
Yeah.
physiologically to do something like
Yeah.
that. And it's like, I think people are like, alcohol is good or bad, but little changes like that, like I'll have drinks, like I enjoy wine but I'm much more intentional with when and how I do it as opposed to just whenever. And weirdly enough, some of our cultural norms are just like the worst when it comes for sleep. It's like we didn't really think it through. So I think those little adjustments, it's like it's those minor adjustments. If you think about that, and I'm just like thinking off the top of my head, like with the wine, right? One glass of wine, let's say you move it up before dinner, I would guess that probably could add 15 to 20 minutes of REM sleep that night, just statistically based on the study. You're talking 20 minutes a night. Let's say you do that every night. Hopefully not, but let's just say, for good measure, that's an extra, you know, 2 hours of REM sleep a week. You're
Right.
talking
yeah.
8 hours. So, that's 40 hours of REM sleep. That's almost 2 full days of REM sleep in a year just by shifting that glass of wine a little earlier. So I think sometimes like these changes seem massive,
Yeah.
but the little things where you're actually doing the same behaviors, you're just more intentional. It's like can have a huge impact and not, take away something necessarily.
Totally. I mean, I love that approach because as soon as you tell someone not to do something, like, oh,
Yeah, it's
if
not.
you want to have better sleep, stop drinking. Well,
Yeah,
no,
no,
I mean, most people are not going to do that. So it's like,
no.
well, just look at the clock and make sure that you're done by this time
Yeah,
and then switch to something non-alcoholic and or non-caffeinated
yeah.
and
Alcohol is
enjoy
tricky
your night.
too. Yeah, it's tricky too because it makes people feel like they sleep well. Like, it's a sedative, so it does make you fall
Right.
asleep faster, right? And so you assume, and then also you feel like you're sleeping hard because like a lot of people wake up more often, but it's very short, so they don't remember it. And then, it reduces the amount of REM sleep you're having, so your brain tries to make up for it, and then you are sleeping deep when like closer to the morning. And so when you wake up, you're like, man, I was knocked out. I was
Ah,
sleeping so hard. Well, it's like, well, it's not really the whole story, but I get why if we didn't have the data on it, I see why night caps existed. It does help you fall asleep faster.
yeah.
And it
But
probably does
like,
feel like you're sleeping better.
yeah. I mean, I see with the Aura ring, I do see, I mean, I usually don't feel like I've slept well when I have alcohol, and I actually see it on the Aura ring. And even with like my HRV tracking, it always tanks when I have
Yeah. But
alcohol.
I think
So
subjectively, like, do you think, like, for me, sometimes if I didn't see that with the HRV and some of the metrics, I think I would say that I sleep really, really well.
I don't feel like I get a solid sleep when I drink.
Well,
And
that's good.
I'm not a big drinker though, so I feel
Yeah.
like when I do drink,
You're only
I
having a couple
feel
bottles of
it.
wine at a time.
Yo, you're right. Yeah,
Exactly.
I would be in the hospital if I
Yeah.
had a couple bottles of wine. But yeah, I feel it.
Yeah. See, I'm
Um,
someone that like I think a lot of people like, they do fall asleep fast. And if you get into a habit of it, it takes a little while to be able to sleep without it. So I think a lot of people just think it helps. And I honestly feel like they help them
oh
sleep. And
yeah.
THC, we run into like similar issues of people, there's
Hmm.
this movement of like THC is all
Yeah.
natural, so it's good for you. And it's like, well, not
And people
necessarily.
take it every night to go to sleep. I know a
And
lot of
yeah, and
people
then
that do that. And I'm like, if you need anything, to help you fall. Well, that's a
Yeah.
whole other
Yeah.
conversation. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if we can change gears and talk
Yeah.
about nasal breathing and mouth taping. You know, I was first introduced to nasal breathing when I read James Nestor's book,
Yeah.
Breathe. That
One
book
of the most impactful books, I mean, in
Mhm.
that wellness space.
impacted me so
Wow.
much. I just was like, wow, like even when he talks about, the face shape and your jaw and like all the things affected by your mouth hanging open.
Yeah.
So, I'm wondering if you can dive into that a little bit. A lot of people, that I've shared with that I'm doing mouth taping now, they think I'm
That's
crazy.
yeah.
Like they actually
Imagine what they
think
think
I'm
of me.
crazy.
Well,
So I'm trying to explain it. I don't think I do the best job.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little introduction into mouth taping?
It's interesting because I was with a big sleep doctor, a really well-known sleep doctor last week, and they've been kind of anti-mouth tape. And I think that
hmm,
the reason and the thought behind it is really misunderstood. Just with, it's become kind of trendy and TikTok worthy and all this stuff. And
yeah.
anytime money gets involved, people tend to start marketing it in some wild ways. But I really think it comes down to the behaviors and the brain and the psychology of everything. So when we think of nasal breathing, there's a lot of reasons why it's healthy. It produces nitric oxide, lowers your blood pressure, filters the air, warms the air. There's a ton of stuff, but I think the most impactful and why it's so powerful is its connection with our nervous system, right? That our breath is the steering wheel of our nervous system. And when you're breathing out of your nose, that is truly the fastest and most effective way to get you into a parasympathetic state and really relax your body, which is exactly what needs to happen when we sleep. And so I think what's actually going on with mouth taping is we know breath is powerful. Now, people in the space, it's powerful breathing, all the apps out there, there's all this stuff. But I think it's also difficult for people to get on board with. I think it takes a lot of effort and intention and willpower to really dive into breathing. And I think it's a little overwhelming, and I think honestly people are kind of like put off by it immediately. So I think what it's doing is actually like backing you into some of these behavior changes. Like behavior change is so difficult, but mouth taping is a way to almost back someone into breathing correctly and doing breathing protocols where you're kind of forced to breathe through your nose and you train yourself to calm down and essentially do breathing exercises without even knowing it. And a lot of people are never relaxed with the amount of stressors, the
Mhm.
lack of awareness of their breath and the way that they live their life. Like that's the first time their nervous system is actually probably down regulated the entire day. And so they get to feel the outcome of actually diving into like doing some breathing techniques without actually knowing what's happening. And I think people, have profound results because they wouldn't be willing to do it any other way. So I think the nervous system is the most impactful thing. And it also, unrelated to any of the science of it, I think it creates such a routine. And that's another thing that people have never had. They never really had a moment where they're like, I'm turning off, I'm shutting my brain down, I'm committing to going to bed. Where a lot of people are doing stuff on their phone, they're talking, watch TV, whatever it is. And at least this is something that starts to trigger that routine for a majority of people who have never even had that or thought about it.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, that and then the eye mask, you can't
Oh
do
yeah.
anything else. So you're
The eye mask, what's crazy is like the eye mask is funny because just from a business side, it's one of the hardest things to market. It's people aren't that excited to try it. They've been around for guys especially. It's kind of pinned as like a beauty, like luxury type thing. But I'll tell you what, once you get someone to try it and get used to it and commit to it, they will never not use an eye mask. Like it is the best product, and I think it's the most impactful thing. But it's a hard sell initially. It's definitely hard to get people to like be willing to try it out and
Well,
yeah,
commit. You can't just do it one night. You have to like give it a week or two.
so I
yeah.
don't use an eye mask at home. We have a very dark bedroom,
Yep.
blackout shades. But anytime I go anywhere, I'm like traveling,
Mm.
I cannot sleep without an eye mask.
And that's kind of the what we tell athletes is like, for an athlete, it's like you need to control the controllables and hotel rooms, travel, games, all that stuff. It's like being able to duplicate or replicate that environment wherever
Mhm.
you go for an easy and cheap item is really powerful. So yeah, you know what's weird though for me, I even if I have the super blacked out room, I still wear it because of like the psychological trigger of like, oh, it's bedtime. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like it's almost like a weighted blanket in the sense that it kind of know like my brain is trained to like that's time to go to bed.
So are you wearing
Well,
earplugs too?
I
Sorry.
don't I don't do earplugs. We're coming out of the earplugs, but I've never been into the earplugs. I'm very pro earplug, especially for hotels and stuff, you know, first night in a new environment. But I've never gotten into it. My partner Cole does. He's a hardcore earplug person. So yeah, that's another thing that can be really useful, especially depending where you're at.
yeah, I mean, I love the eye masks. I actually love yours because I had purchased one several years ago, like before your company was even out, and I
Yeah.
lost it traveling. And so I bought some cheap one, and then I got yours, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh, these are, I mean,
We're
it's
coming out
like
with a new one
luxury.
in like 2 months. That's like that blows it. Like this next one is I've never it by far blows everything else
Okay.
out of the water that I've tried.
Well,
So
I
what
can't wait.
makes it so special or unique?
Well, so the one thing right now, the really the biggest differentiator is the density of the silk. So it's the highest quality silk you can make, which means that it absorbs the least amount of oil and moisture. So it's very cooling, right? So you know the moisture, the reason we sweat is it cools us off. So a lot of times when you have like a lower quality silk or cotton, whatever it may be, it absorbs a lot of that moisture. So you feel warmer or hotter. And uh so we also make our pillowcases with the same silk, and so the
Mm.
combination, it's really more of a temperature thing. And so especially guys tend to sleep hot. Some females as well, just depending on different times of the month, different times of their life. A lot of things
Yeah.
change temperature wise, but the temperature tends to be a big factor in that. So that's the biggest difference. And there's little things like the straps, the comfort of the straps, the size of the straps, how. But this next one we're coming out, it's not silk, but it's a really heavy material and the blackout shape. And you know we've been working on it for a long time. So the sleep mask
Okay.
enthusiasts of the world will really appreciate all the
Okay.
details. But for
Well,
a
I
first
look
timer,
forward
it's
to
like
that.
you know you're not comparing it to anything. So
Right. No, yeah. So the one thing we want to talk about a little bit is like snoring, heart rate variability with the mouth tape, because that's something as a mouth breather for many, many years. I would snore and people would be like, how are you snoring? Like, you're not overweight, like, why are you snoring? And I know I
yeah.
have a lot of issues with mouth. I mean, that book James Nestor's book just really resonated with
Did
me.
you self-diagnose what your snoring
Well,
issue was?
I have a functional, like a holistic dentist. And so she
Mm.
kind of helped me. I've got, I probably need to do like therapy with my tongue and all this sort of weird things.
Dentists are
Um,
our biggest fans. You know, it's kind of it's kind of wild is like the no, I don't want to say disconnect. That's not the right word, but the differences in opinions of the different medical silos. You know, where a dentist,
yeah,
and then like you're maybe it's just like a family doctor. Like the lens in which they see stuff through is so much different. But I
so
think
different.
dentists, based on what they do and how much, people don't realize just as far as like airways and the
Yeah.
nose and how much that space has changed and they've understood like the importance of those things. Um, I love talking to dentists because I think they're really on the cutting edge of understanding like the impact that this stuff can have.
Yes. And we did talk about this on an episode where we interviewed a functional dentist and she was great. And we can,
Functional dentist, I love like that's a
yeah,
cool like I don't even know where I would find one of those. I don't know if we have
You
that here
yeah,
you should
still.
she's
get in
in
touch with her
Portland.
actually.
I'd
We
love to,
can,
yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Yep. She's great. And we just heard her speak at a conference last week in Orlando, actually.
Awesome.
Um,
What was her take on what was her take on your stuff?
oh, she's a big proponent of nasal breathing. And
Yeah.
I thought I could train my mouth or my body to just nasal breathe on its own. So I'd stop mouth taping. And she's like, for her personally, she's like, I just need to do it every night. So I just know I will be your
Yeah.
biggest subscriber, Ted, because
Yeah.
I don't
Some
think I
people
can go without
do.
my mouth tape.
Some people definitely do. I I think I have some more structural things going on. Same with my wife, where my wife definitely needs like, the bigger tape and it's
Yeah.
a structural, their jaw is shaped a little bit differently. But Yeah, it's interesting because some people do. Like some people can really train themselves and don't need it. That's why I think the small strips are awesome because it's
Yeah.
also one of those things where like you don't always know for sure, you know? So it's like might as well just have a little security. That's what we usually tell people. But yeah, it's
Well,
cool. It's cool when people don't need it anymore.
the thing
Yeah.
that I have found, so I started with the big tape, went to the little tape,
Yeah.
and even if my mouth is open a tiny bit, I don't feel like I'm mouth breathing. But if I go a night without the mouth tape, I hate the way it feels in the morning.
Yeah.
Like I can wake up in the morning with the mouth tape and my mouth it still feels kind of fresh in all
Yeah.
honesty. Whereas
Yeah.
when you don't have mouth tape, it's like, oh,
Well,
like
you're
I
Yeah.
just
dry.
like
Your
Oh.
yeah, and
mouth
it's
is
just like
dry.
the
What's
taste
weird is
and
I didn't realize it though. Like, up until I did it, you don't have any perspective. Like that's
yeah,
every
right.
morning's
Yeah.
like that. So when people would ask me, do you have dry mouth in the morning? And I was like, no. But then,
Right.
but that was just the morning. Like that, I didn't realize that it was even dry. But then once you feel the difference, you're like, oh wow, this is a whole different thing.
I mean, the number of people that I have shared your mouth tape with who are like, this is life changing because my husband's not snoring anymore. I
Oh,
mean,
you
you're like
should see.
saving marriages here.
We get some wild messages from people like you
Oh, I'm
legit saved
sure.
our marriage. Like
Yes. Yes.
crazy things, which it makes sense though. I mean, snoring and
Oh,
like I can't, that would drive you crazy if you had like a really bad snore,
oh,
and the whole sleep divorce thing is becoming a really popular thing. But
yep.
I'm a little old school in the sense of like I think there's value in like obviously sleeping together and contact. It's not necessarily like some people probably have a great relationship with it, but there's just so many things you can do before you get to that point. So,
Yeah,
I
right.
guess if you don't care at all or you don't view it in that way, it'd be totally fine to jump to that. But it's like I rarely have people explored all the options before they do that.
Yeah. So I'm wondering as we're talking about the mouth tape, I have heard when I have tried to share it with certain people, they're like, "Oh, well, I have sleep apnea or I have
Yeah.
such and such, and my doctor said I am not allowed to mouth tape because it's not
Yeah.
safe." Are there people out there that you would blanketly say, "Do not mouth tape. It's not safe for you," even the little strips, and or they need to consult with their doctor,
Yeah. I
knowing
think
that
that,
none of us are doctors and we are not giving medical advice on this
yeah.
podcast, but just having the conversation around it.
Yeah, if there's like obstructive apnea and it's pretty severe, it's like you definitely want to work with a doctor. And I think there's a lot of things you can do even in the day to train yourself to breathe correctly, but you always want to be consulting with, over certain BMIs. We have it all on our packaging, but you definitely don't want to do it if you're really overweight. When you have like an airway collapsing, um, it can be a risk. I mean, it's a risk in general to have that happening, right? So to add another layer of a possible issue, it's always good to talk to your doctor. But you know, we've seen a lot of success with people on the mild side when they work with a doc and they kind of train themselves. And I'm one of those people that had moderate apnea and it
Hmm.
did wonders. It completely fixed my sleep study. So obviously we always encourage that, but there's a lot of reasons it could be happening. And the
Hmm.
one thing I will say for sure is like if there's any suspicion that you have apnea, getting a sleep study done could save your life. I mean, sleep apnea is one of the most underdiagnosed things out there. And our goal, like we really believe that the sleep study should be like blood work. Like it should just be something
Hmm.
preliminary you make sure there's no issues. You have the data to compare it to. It's kind of like blood work where like if you don't get blood work ever until you don't feel good, well, that's not really useful because you don't really
Right.
know what to compare it to. And even differences within the norms could be a vast difference for you personally. If you're at the
Mhm.
upper end of a norm and all of a sudden you're at the bottom, like you're going to feel different. So I think sleep studies will be the same way where, you know, if you have apnea, you don't have apnea, but at least you understand where you're starting and your baseline, and then you go from there because one thing's for certain, long-term untreated apnea for the brain, the heart, it wrecks it runs havoc on those things. I mean, it's essentially like little bouts of oxygen deprivation, almost like little mini strokes for your brain when that's happening. And there's actually some wild stuff coming out, especially with young kids, the mouth breathing and apnea,
Hmm.
and just if you think about those little bouts of not having oxygen in a developing brain, how impactful that can be. So there's some really interesting new studies coming out about um, the learning disabilities and obviously brain development, and some of these things are linked to the type of breathing and sleeping they're doing that was never really thought of before. So I think it's something to keep an eye on as a parent, and just, be mindful of watching, seeing how your kid's breathing, addressing those things early on if there is any questions of something's going on, because, I think we're just tapping the surface for understanding some of the long-term effects of this stuff.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I actually have given mouth tape to my 14-year-old.
Yeah, I mean,
even when he was 13.
we always shy away from it, but we have
I
a
know.
lot of strips, or the little strips ordered for, by parents, for that very reason.
Yeah. So lot of good things to consider.
Yeah.
So one question we have is just like weight loss and sleep, because we know a lot
Yeah.
of people are focused on weight loss. What's the correlation, and how can improving sleep and maybe even
You know,
specifically nasal breathing contribute?
yeah. So weight loss is very hard, right? Like
Yes.
it is one of the hardest things when you think about changing behaviors, and the success rates on weight loss. It is not high.
Mm-mm.
And what's interesting is if somebody's like, I want to lose weight, what they tend to do is they attack the most difficult things right away. Usually like, I'm going to wake up early, or even I'm just going to start running or working out, and I'm going to eat a super healthy diet. And those are hard. Like, nobody likes to do that stuff, like it takes a huge amount of effort. And what's interesting is sleep is the thing that can literally make all of these easier. It can make your decisions in eating easier. It can make you eat less food. It can make your will of exercise higher. It can make your exercise actually more impactful by the amount of output you have. So, I'm always like, okay, we have this thing where our society is really, really struggles with. We have an obesity epidemic. We do not seem to have weight loss handled as a population. So let's raise our chances of success as high as we can before we start down this journey. And sleep is the best way to do that. When we look at sleep, it's really our time to reset our hunger, and the way our brain interprets the amount of food we're eating and the type of food. So, people are underslept, just like 5 hours compared to 8. They eat 300 to 400 calories more on average.
Mhm.
And that's not because they're up longer. That even if you take that factor out of it, it's literally just because you crave saltier, higher fat foods, and you overconsume because your hunger hormones are not reset in the proper ways. So just by doing that alone, you think how impactful that is. That's in a 2-week time span. That could be the difference of a losing a pound or gaining a pound, just in a 2-week time span, by adding 3 hours of sleep. And the other thing is, it's like, sleep is pretty enjoyable. I don't know about you guys, but I like sleeping. And
Right.
so it's like we have this thing that's impacts all the aspects of weight loss, that's enjoyable, that's the last thing people think about. And then when it comes to exercise, from a motivational level, from a neuromodulator, and just your motivation and your willingness, your chances that you execute a exercise plan go up substantially. And then, like I said, your perceived exertion is lowered quite substantially, meaning, like, when you're underslept, the workouts feel harder than they are. It goes up about
Mm-hmm.
20%. So, like, if a workout's already hard, you don't need to make it feel harder, because you're still getting the same amount out of the workout from your body's response, but it literally just feels harder. That's the only difference. So we want our workouts to feel as easy as possible, right? Like, we want to, or it allows you to work harder and get more out of the workout. So I just think, anytime someone's has a goal of weight loss, it's the first thing I ask about is what's their sleep schedule look like? Because if it's not dialed in and consistent, it's going to be an uphill battle from day one. It could be a big reason why they're actually, maybe they're overweight or they gain weight. That it could be a huge factor. A lot of times, stresses and life changes impact that, and that kind of what kicks off a weight gain oftentimes.
Well, and even the late nights, right? So a lot of people that are wanting to lose weight, when you dig into their sleep, a lot of them are night owls. And when you
Yeah.
stay up late and the sun is down, the snacking, sometimes
Yep.
people want to eat when they're alone and they're snacking.
I
And
do that for sure. If
there's
I
a
stay up
lot of,
late.
yeah, I mean, the later you stay up, the more you want to snack, right? Oh,
Hmm.
let's have some popcorn. Let's have some chips, like whatever it is. Like,
Yeah. And a lot of things
So,
build with that too. Anxiety builds throughout the day naturally. The
mhm.
hunger hormones can build throughout the day naturally. So, you know, it makes sense that things happen that way. And I think, but I do think in this is a case, with eating and exercise, I think education doesn't play quite as big a role as it used to. I do think if you ask majority of people, what's a healthy meal look like? They probably have a pretty good idea. Is
Mhm.
exercise good for you? What type of exercise? But
Right.
I do think education does play a big role in the impact of these types of things, like how impactful sleep is when it comes to weight loss and exercise and body composition, because the first thing people think about is Rocky waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning and cracking eggs. Like that is still the mindset of like, if I'm gonna have an overhaul body transformation, I need to wake up at 4 in the morning and work out before work, when that might not be the best route to go.
But
Yes.
if you do have a full day, like for me, I'll wake up at 6 in the morning and work out before my day, and I still feel like I'm getting my solid
Yeah.
night's sleep.
Oh yeah, I have no problem with waking up early. It's waking up early when you're just cutting it out of your sleep as opposed to readjusting your schedule. And that's
Right.
what I think that's what most people do. Like maybe they're already only sleeping 6 or 7 hours and they're like, I'm gonna go on a weight loss journey. I'm gonna carve out my exercise time within the time that I'm
With
normally sleeping.
Yeah, that's not good.
And that's not great. And there's also,
Yeah.
I think people are honest too, they put like exercise on a pedestal of like, I need to like be on an elliptical or a stair climber. It needs to be my workout time. Well, it's like, if you can take 4 10-minute walks or like even just be more
Hmm.
intentional with moving around, like, if you can optimize your hunger hormones and your diet, like you're going to have a lot more success. The,
Yeah.
the workout can be gradually worked in and I think adjusted more with your schedule. It doesn't need to be like a dedicated, like hardcore workout. I think people like, they feel like that needs to be part of that journey. And vice versa,
Hmm.
I'll see people do an hour workout, but they go do machines and they're resting 3 minutes between sets and like vice versa. It's like that's also not that impactful for what you're trying to do sometimes. It just is seen as this, it's a workout, so it's really helpful. So I think some of the labels often throw people off too, and with as regards to schedule and prioritizing sleep. So I think it's like ranking these things. In my head, it's like you have your sleep, and then that kind of cascades into diet being probably the second most important. And then I think the workouts can fall after that. And I think it goes actually the other direction for most people.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
100% agree. Okay. So pivoting a little bit, we have a lot of listeners who are probably middle age, female, and wake up in the middle of the night to go to
Yes.
the bathroom. And
Yep.
then their minds are racing because, I mean, a lot of women, at least a lot of our clients, are going, 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 and they can't fall back to sleep. And so it's
Yep.
not that they have an issue falling asleep at night.
Yep.
If anything, some maybe they're falling asleep too soon because they're overtired. But
Hmm.
then they're stuck in this state at 2 in the morning and they can't go back to sleep.
Yeah, that's pretty common. Um, have you guys ever had problems with that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, my first question is, I always get asked, I wake up every day at 3 in the morning and I can't fall back asleep. And I'll say, well, how do you know it's 3 in the morning? And
Because they're
then
looking at their phone when you should
Yeah.
be.
exactly. Yeah. So, I think the most important thing with sleep is creating a place of restfulness and relaxation with your bed. And anytime you're removing the feelings of that, or you're fighting yourself to fall back asleep, or you're anxious, it does no, you do not want to stay in that space, because subconsciously your brain is going to start attaching those emotions and feelings with that space. All of a sudden your bed starts to go from this relaxation, almost like oasis, to a stressful environment because you're worried you're not going to be able to fall back asleep in the middle of the night, right? So my first recommendation is always, if you're sitting there for more than 15 minutes and can't fall back asleep, get yourself out of the space, take your mind off it, at least move somewhere different, go read a book, something to just detach that feeling of anxiousness from your bed in your bedroom. I think that's really powerful. And I think the second thing to think about is, are you waking up and thinking about the same thing over and over again? Like, is it a reoccurring theme? Because a lot of times, for any age, people think they have a sleep issue, but it's really a stress management and something much, much deeper foundational purpose in their life or things going on in their life. And you know, the amount of people that have sought out like therapy and talking to professional because of a so-called sleep issue, I can't even count how many. And it's because a lot of times that it pops up as a sleep issue, but really it becomes, there's these things in your life that you're unhappy with or stressed about that you're not really addressing. And when anxiety is at its peak, which is usually that time frame, middle of the night, that keeps popping up more and more. And so when they address those, they tend to sleep much, much better. If someone's fulfilled, they feel purpose in their life, they have good relationships. If you picture that person in your head, rarely do they have problems sleeping. And so I think it's a lot more foundational than people often think.
And I also think about like thinking about waking up in the middle of the night. I'm thinking about my dad specifically. I think he tells himself a story over and over again that he wakes up in the middle of the night. So it's almost like he has trained himself
Like
to
that's
get
his
up
thing.
every night at whatever time and go to the bathroom and then
Yeah.
try and go back to sleep. And
Yeah.
I see that with other people too. And it's like there is something called like mindset training, right? And if you're telling yourself the story that you wake up in the middle of the night every night, then guess what? You're
Yeah,
probably
you're gonna
going
be right.
to.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I think there's a couple things to it that you can do to limit the amount of times that happen. With hydration in general, waking up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night is normal, but it's 4 or 5 times. Like every time you wake up, there's a chance like you start thinking about something, you get stressed about something. You might stub your toe on the way to the bathroom. I'm only saying that because I broke my toe doing that one time.
Oh,
But like,
gosh.
the thing about every time that you go to the bathroom or wake up, there's a chance that you don't fall back asleep. It's almost like having a deck of cards, right? Like it's like playing a deck of cards. There's a small chance every time that it's going to happen. Well, let's limit the amount of chances. Let's limit the amount of hands we're playing there. And so even if you have a great relationship, you don't want to be waking up more than you need to because there's something could happen every single time. So I think with hydration specifically, people really miss the mark where they know hydration is important. A lot of times they're preoccupied throughout the day, and then they try to make up for it at night, and they tend to have a lot of fluid intake the second half of the day when really we want to front load our hydration and be mindful in the PM time of how much we're having and also how much we're having per sitting. So if you're drinking like 4 or 5 ounces at a time, that's going to trigger you to have to go to the bathroom more often because your body's trying to balance your electrolytes. So it's like, oh, we're drinking a bunch of water. We need to, urinate more often. So taking sips of water in the evening and also being mindful of the majority of your hydration coming in the first half of the day can be a really useful tool, even for someone with anxiety, right? Let's say they're dealing with stuff, or they're having a really hard time. We'll limit the amount of times that going to the bathroom wakes you up. You're still going to deal with those issues, but there's no reason to give yourself more chances to think about that stuff.
I think those are all really awesome tips.
Yeah. And then the other thing, honestly, like people are so hard on themselves. Like I said, people pull all-nighters. You've had nights you haven't slept well. Like if you have a bad night's sleep, it's not worth beating yourself up. Like get up, move around. Like, yeah, you might have to, it might be a little rough, you might be a little tired that day, but you're gonna be fine. Fast forward 12 hours, you're gonna be home, you're gonna be, getting ready for bed again, and you get another shot at it. So I think people are just give yourself a little grace. Everybody has the bad night sleeps. It's totally normal. So don't freak out about it. I think there's been a little bit of an obsession with that, and people, it's almost like they know too much. Like all this stuff is doing your body, so you're like freaking out inside, but it'll be fine. Like everything's gonna be fine. It's normal.
Yeah. So I know we have to like start to wrap up this conversation here, but I would love for you to have the opportunity to quickly just show your products
Yeah,
because we
I
are
mean,
on
so
YouTube and I want people
yeah,
to actually see what mouth tape
I
is
mean,
and
it's pretty
maybe
straightforward.
Yep.
while you're
And it's
doing that.
breathable. Yeah.
So
Yes.
so this is our regular mouth tape. This is our strips. So these are like small vertical strips. They're also stretchy, so you can see like these stretch. These are great for someone that's a little nervous, and these are actually we sell the most of these um, just because of the ease of use and how small they are. These are a little more powerful. We also have a skincare infused one that has like an anti-aging. We're coming out in nasal strips. We're also coming out in blue light blocking glasses. We have eye mask pillowcases. Really, in general, we're trying to create like an entire
Line.
portfolio of all
Yeah.
all the sleep stuff. They'll always be holistic though. We'll never go down the the tech route just because we're trying to, we're trying to change behaviors and the way people think about sleep. We're not trying to implement more things that could stress people out. So, yeah, it's really cool because I think it's a rare opportunity in life to have a lot of purpose and honestly help a lot of people and also have it be a business. I mean, that's a pretty unique opportunity and pretty grateful for that. I think about that a lot when I'm doing
Yes.
different stuff. So it's been a really fun journey.
Yeah. Well, we love everything that you're doing and love your
Appreciate
products
it.
and can't wait to try the new mouth strips.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
Todd, one final question we love to ask all of our guests is what does the art of living well mean to you?
The art of living well is, I think it is the art of doing whatever you need to do to feel as good as you can. Because I think the value in just feeling as good as you can is you get to pour yourself into the people around you. And there's not a better feeling in the world than that. But I think it takes a lot of effort. And it is an art. It is truly an art of self-exploration and figuring out what works for you, what doesn't, what's impactful for you. And so I think as much as that seems easy and straightforward, I think there's a lot of intention there. Like being the best and showing up for other people takes a lot of effort on your side. And it's not something that just happens without thought.
Mm, that's
Agree.
yes. Beautiful way to end this conversation. And you've
Yeah.
clearly you've done that. You're on your own journey and path and
Trying.
you're, you know,
Everything, everybody's trying their best.
exactly. Oh boy. Well, thank you so much, Todd. This
Yeah,
was a
thank you
really
guys
fun conversation.
for sure. It's been great.
Okay.
Have a
Have a
great
good one.
day.
All right, see ya.